You are tuned into the Power Chord Hour. Thanks for tuning in, whether you were listening to the radio show on 107.9 WRFA or listening on the Power Chord Hour podcast. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I'm your host, Anthony Merchant, and today our guest on this one is Chris Wrenn of iconic label Bridge 9 Records. I'm sure many listening right now have at least a few albums from the label in their collection. And we're going to talk all about Bridge 9 Records. And also, if you've not seen, they have a brand new record store as well over in Beverly, Mass. So talk about the new record store and just, again, Bridge 9 Records as a whole. I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. So, Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, let's get into it. I was thinking about this earlier. As we are going into 2023 here, what year will that mark for Bridge 9? What is this next coming year? What will that mark for
That's
you?
28 years.
Wow.
So the label started in 1995.
Do you have like an exact date or at least one in your head mentally that you feel like that was the day it started, or is it just kind of a blurry, it started somewhere in there kind of?
It was like mid 95. I don't know the exact date, but like summertime.
Do you how about like running the label like early on? I guess we kind of start like at the history of it. I want to kind of go back a little bit, but like starting out with running a record label, I'm always kind of interested in this for like jumping into something like that. Had you, before doing Bridge 9, had you done any inkling of like running a label, be it an intern at a label or doing anything that could kind of translate into running a record label?
No, I was literally the least qualified person. I had no music, business history, experience, anything. I was always a self-starter. I'd always try and do my own thing, and I was helping friends, bands with their demo tapes and designs for T-shirts and stuff like that. And I don't know. I wanted to do something to stay connected to my hometown scene. I had recently left my hometown to go to college a couple states away. So I just wanted something that I could work on and be connected. And you don't think that you're going to start a record label. You're just going to put out a record. You're just going to do something with your friends. That first record that I did was kids from my high school. So, it was just something like familiar.
That is to be a crazy thing too. I think about it as well with, like that, you're putting out like high school friends bands. Whether it's the label or the band itself, I feel like very few people can do something like that at such a young age and it be something that later sustains into like this. Like, I don't know what you really thought at this point. You'd be, not only do you have the record label, you have the record store and all this. And it's like, how many people just kind of do that as a hobby to start out or just kind of for fun? Even by the sounds of you, it doesn't sound like you started it thinking, wow, I'm going to like really leave a mark in music with this thing, or I'll be doing this forever or anything like that.
I was 19 when I started. Most people I knew started record labels or what became record labels when they were teenagers, and no one had a business plan. Nobody was like, this is what I'm going to do. And for most people that I knew, it was just something that they did for a few years, for fun, put out a handful of records with their friends' bands. And I don't know, I just kept going. I didn't stop.
Was there ever a moment for you? Because I guess somewhere in there it does, and maybe you notice it or maybe you don't, but like it does go from that thing of, I guess, hobby or what you do for fun to, oh wow, this can become a job. Like this is gonna kind of keep going. Was there ever like a defining moment for you where you kind of noticed like you were gonna this wasn't just gonna be a thing of, hey, I put out a friend or two's record and then it kind of dissolves? And was there a moment you're like, oh wow, like okay, this is gonna keep going?
There was definitely a time where I was like, I never really, again, there was no plan, but I think I got to the point where I was like, oh shit, I'm actually putting out too many records. I can't do my day job anymore. I have to put all my energy into this. It can't just be nights and weekends.
That's pretty neat. I feel like that has to be a pretty good feeling though, to realize, oh, okay, I guess this is the job now. This is the thing I have to do.
Yeah.
The other thing, like with the label, I know you said you really before that had like no label experience, anything like that. But like, how long was Bridge 9 kind of an idea in your head before actually getting out? Like even your friends from high school's, record. Like how long was it a thought you even kind of kicked around in your head? Was it pretty instant, or was that something you toyed with for a while before actually executing the plan?
It was pretty quick. It started, I mean, it was an idea, and within that year, the first record came out. So it was probably like early '95. I was like, oh, that'd be cool. You know, I had friends of mine that I went to school with were the ones that said, hey, you should try doing this, because they knew other people that had put out records. I knew people from my high school that had put out records on their own labels, and you know, it was like, all right, like let's give it a shot.
Specifically for, like you were saying, we knew other people who like were putting out records and stuff. So like there were other like local labels and people putting things out. How about though, like hardcore and kind of what Bridge 9 was doing? Were there many other labels putting that out, or were you kind of one of the only ones doing kind of the hardcore punk thing?
Oh, no. I mean, I think when Bridge 9 first started, 95, 96, 97, I mean, I feel like it was one of like 100 labels. You know, I mean, there was a lot of labels that were run by people that were, you know, teenagers, 19, 20 years old, that were just putting out 1 7-inch record a year. So kind of like I was at first, you know.
But they weren't all some of those, yeah, were like, you know, if you went and looked on I guess Discogs or something, maybe they released like a handful of records or something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, it was, I mean, again, these are all people that nobody had any real business plan. Nobody was like trying to do anything beyond just putting out a record, waiting till it recoups, try it again, you know, do it a few times.
With that, because I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I talk to a lot of musicians, so I can kind of get on like the music scene part of it, like from a musician standpoint, but like it's kind of interesting. I feel like getting on the label side and like knowing that there were so many people putting out records and stuff like that, like from the local label aspect, like were people kind of helping one another, or was it a little more competitive? I mean, what were labels like back then? Were you all kind of working together, helping each other? Is everyone kind of in their own lane, kind of doing their own thing?
I feel like at that level, it was something where people help each other out. I know I had originally reached out to somebody that did a label, because, you know, when you start, when you decide like, hey, I want to put out a record, or I want to, you know, release a single with a friend's band, like especially in the mid '90s, there's no real guide, right? Like there was a few things here and there that you could try and read into about how to do it, but you really had to find someone that had already done it and pick their brain, you know. And that's what I did. I mean, I found somebody that had already put out a bunch of records and just called them.
Wow.
You know?
It's so weird to think of now. Like at the time, I mean, you're right. You just got to find a way to do it. But like at this point, like in the age of the internet and everything, it's almost wild. I feel like I'm sure there's many things of the ways labels, the way you probably ran the label back then to now. I mean, I'm sure things are just totally different. But even thinking of that, like you have to call these people and find them and stuff. You can't just, you know, I don't know, go on the label's website and like hit the contact form or something like that and hope you get a hold of the label owner or something.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, I was given the phone number of this guy, Scott Bybin, who did a label called Bloodlink out of Philly in the mid '90s, and a friend of his gave me his cell phone, it just gave me his phone number on a piece of paper, and I had to call him from a payphone. You know, and this is somebody that I didn't know, but I was like, hey, you know, my friend Mark, who you know, gave me your number, and it was just like, hey, you know, basically told him like, I want to put out a record. Where should I start? And I mean, I probably sounded like such a noob, you know, kind of like, you know, he's probably like, who's this random kid that's calling me from out of nowhere? But back then, it wasn't uncommon. I mean, you know, people were reaching out to each other through letters and phone calls in a way that I don't think people do anymore. I mean, now obviously you just drop somebody an email if you don't know them. But
were you at all on the label side? Because like I feel like bands from this era too, that's kind of like the book your own fucking life like era of that. I mean, like, was that helpful for the label side? Like, could you utilize that at all for being doing the label side of things?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, MRR and like fanzines like that were a great resource. But yeah, you really just had to find people that were already doing it and just ask questions. You know.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's why, like, I mean, when people hit me up for, you know, about stuff, I always try to be, you know, kind of continue to pay it forward as much as I can, because I was in a position where like, I had no idea what I was doing. Sometimes I still don't, you know, like it's just, you just have to kind of like, you know, stumble through it and then you know, talk to people that have had some experience in it.
No, I mean, I would almost argue too, like, I mean, I guess just like there's almost no like wrong or right way to like start a band or something. I would almost even think a label would be harder because when you think about it, I don't know, at least with a band, I mean, you figure out the rest later, but you get a handful of people you start playing. But like to run a label, like where do you go from there? It almost seems like there is like it seems like a harder thing to just jump into, I feel like. And also as a one person kind of deal. It's not a go find your bandmates and go on. I mean, obviously you later on have people helping running the label. I'm sure early on it's basically just you. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, it's all DIY. I mean, it's in a lot of levels, it still is even today. But like when when you get started, I mean, you have to also know that you're not like the scope of what you're trying to do when you're at that point early on. Like you're not trying to build whatever like for Bridge Nine. Like I had no idea that Bridge Nine would continue on to where it's at now. But like at the time, I was like, I just have this one band, and we want to put out this one record. And I mean, I was doing one a year. So like it was a pretty, I mean, it felt like a huge commitment at the time. And it was something that I put all my energy into, but it wasn't like all encompassing. But I mean, when you don't know where to start, like it seems crazy, and like the idea of like, oh, I'm just going to start this thing, especially back then when I would talk to people that had no idea about subcultures and about like what I was into with punk. They were like, oh, a record label, like what, like the Grammys or like gold records, like the scope and like the perception of what a record label is to like a civilian or someone that's not involved in punk at all.
yeah.
It's completely different than the reality. And you can start a record label with, I mean, I think I had like $600, at the time. Like it's just you just start with what you have.
I love that, and you're right. Like, I don't know if other genres. I feel it's so ingrained in like kind of like punk and all that. Where like, so I know it's there, but like, I wonder if there are any other genres really like that. Where like, you really can like, you don't have to have tons and tons of money or fanfare and this or that to get into it, and like how DIY and like how connected things are. Where like, yeah, like where you're talking about, like, there's a lot of people who it's not that obtainable to like talk to some of your heroes or get to, I mean, just how I don't know, like the way punk rock or subgenres and stuff are like that. Like there's so many others where I don't feel like that exists. You're like, oh yeah, I start my label and I put out bands like this. Like that doesn't, I don't feel like that happens everywhere. And maybe it does, but like punk rock seems to be one of the most like DIY and one that kind of exists. Like you yourself could even start the way you did.
Yeah, I think most people's experience in music is a lot different than the experience that you and I have and other people that a lot of, I'm sure your listeners have, is like where you can be very hands on and you come into a community where you see uh, how things are run. Like I remember, like if you were going to a concert in like I don't know, like at like a big stadium or something. I mean, like you're just a random number. You're not a part. You're just a somebody that's watching, but you're not really a part of it. I mean, in obviously in punk, like you have so many roles that people gravitate towards, whether it's being in a band or doing a fanzine or taking photos at shows or putting bands up, at your house, to stay after a show. I feel like there's so many parts that people can contribute to and not just be a spectator.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a part that just blows me away where you start
Yeah.
talking to people who are either like just very casually into music or I mean, are just into things like you're talking about, like arena level things, like things where you are kind of a number and that person you're watching on stage, you're probably not going to get a chance to talk to, or they're probably not selling merch after either. You're not going to go buy like the band's 7-inch from the singer afterwards,
Yep.
an arena like that kind of deal. And you do sometimes I feel like I don't notice it until you talk to people outside of, like the genre or subgenres. I know we're saying punk, it's fairly general, but like
Yeah.
just the whole thing, it's I feel like that's part of the special thing. And again, like talking to you, Bridge Nine is much more bona fide now, but the start of it, very you might not be able to do that in every other genre, which I think is quite cool. But
And I think that being immersed in that kind of subculture or that genre, like it's motivating to want to do something on your own and want to start something because it is obtainable. You see other people doing it. it's not like it's not like the Wizard of Oz, it's like behind the curtain.
No, absolutely, and I mean that's the way to go in my opinion. It's a much better way. I'd rather people look at something like that and go, "Oh, I can do that," than like, "Oh my god, what a scary I don't know what it takes to do that," but like really just jump in and do it, you know.
Yeah.
For you, I mean, we were talking about like with bands, early on, like putting out friends bands and stuff like that. But when you started signing, like bands of people who, may not be a friend, maybe you knew no one in the band and they're just like submitting music or you're looking for them. What were like early on, would you say things you were looking for in a band to sign them? Were there any like, maybe you didn't even have a specific checklist, but was there anything you were looking for in a band that was like, okay, that makes them, either Bridge 9 material or someone I want to work with?
Yeah, I think early on, I used to joke that the one requirement was you had to be a fan of the Bad Brains.
That's a great rule. That
Yeah.
should still be in place.
But no, I mean, it's the number one requirement is really you just have to like the music, right? And you have to be excited by it. But the reality is, especially with a label that has limited resources, which most independent labels do, like you work with people at first that right? Like so in my case, it was people that I went to high school with, and then you work with the bands that they tour with, and like it goes like one ring out like over every I don't know what number of years, right? So like at first it's just the people that I'm friends with that are that I know in Boston or that I would meet on tour, and then then becomes their friends, and then for me it was like the people that worked for me, their friends, you kind of like go a couple of rings out, and it's ultimately when you have again a limited amount of resources, you want to work with people that or people that come like highly recommended to you. So oftentimes it's if you're in a band and you're interested in a label, a lot of times the best way to get to that label is through a band that's already on their roster.
You kind of have that like you trust their word almost. Like if this band vouches for you, then
I mean, that carries a lot of weight. Like we've put out over like 300 releases, and only a handful of them have been completely unsolicited. There's definitely been stuff that I'm like, oh, this is rad, and just put it out just because I wanted to. But most often it's recommended through somebody I already know or have a relationship with.
I mean, with so many releases, it may be hard to like pick specific things like this out. But like, do you remember the first band you put out that was like from another region, not Massachusetts, like was one of the first bands you put out that wasn't from like kind of the New England region, that maybe was from the West Coast or Midwest or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the first band that I talked to from the West Coast was Carry On. That was, the band didn't do a ton themselves back then, but members went on to be in Terror, Nails, Betrayed. There was a bunch of stuff that came out after that, Internal Affairs. But they were a band that was on tour with American Nightmare. So when American Nightmare went to the West Coast for the first time, it was like the fall of 2000. I went with them, and they supported the 4 shows that they played out there. And they were just a sick band. I was like, oh, this band's awesome. So
that's a good way to I feel like too, being in a label, like going on the road like that, good way to see a band, and if you like them or not, go see who they're like opening with and stuff. I mean, I guess you get a little bit of a taste of the live show as well.
Well, you get to see them, you get to see them live, but you also get to spend some time with them and get to know them. I mean, when Bridge 9 went to Europe with American Nightmare on their first European tour in 2001, I signed 2 bands, one from England and one from Holland. When I went to Australia, I signed a band when I was down there. So like, it's like you get to know these people, and you want to work with them, and you want to help them. You have a good time with them in their country, and you're like, oh, this band's rad. You want to bring them and give them exposure, where you're from.
Do you remember for Bridge 9? Do you remember like the first release that kind of did get going again, like talking about like bands outside of your area? Like, you remember the first Bridge 9 release that got buzz kind of again outside of the local region? Like the first one you started, people seemed to notice it outside of Massachusetts.
That was probably so we did a split 7-inch with this band Right Brigade, who was kind of like a half Connecticut. Started as a Connecticut band that moved to Boston, and this other band called Poor Excuse that was from Boston. So that was the first record that really people from around the country were pre-ordering and excited about.
Nice, nice. In the beginning for you, I like talking mail order. I myself do not mail order per se, but shipping a lot of shit. And for you, like in the early days, I mean, what was that like doing? I would imagine you probably did you have a web store in the beginning, or was it
No,
you
no.
in the era of like catalogs and mail order and all that?
Yeah, so I didn't have a website for at least I think 3 years. So I think the first website was like the very end of '98, going into '99. So like the first 3 or 4 years, it was just strictly putting little ads in fanzines. And then, I mean, the move back then was you'd buy like a cheap ad in like a Maximum Rock and Roll or like a fanzine like that got kind of national distribution, and then like a little 6th-page ad. And it would have some promo for whatever you're doing. And it would say, like, send me $1 and I'll send you a catalog and a sticker. And I would just get like letters every day. I would just get these letters from people with like their $1 bill and, like a note. Sometimes they'd draw things on the envelopes. Sometimes it would just be like, hey, here's my address. Or sometimes they'd say, hey, like, what's Boston like? Or back then it was like, what's Connecticut like? Like, I'm from wherever. And, you get pen pals out of it. So, I mean, there's people that I would just like write letters to. And then they'd like, oh, like, so basically you'd place the ad in the fanzine. They'd send you the $1 bill. You'd send them a sticker with a photocopied catalog, right? Like just like one page with whatever you had. And back then it was all cut and paste, and mail it to them. And then they'd be like, oh, I want that record, or I want that t-shirt. And then they'd throw $10 in an envelope and mail it to you. And then you'd send it. So like just to sell one thing, it was like 4 things back and forth. It would take, weeks or months.
Wow. It's stuff. So, I mean, I know like it had to be done that way for a long time. And that was the norm, but like, I don't know if it's different for you for doing it, but like when you talk about it, I know things are done that way, but it's just so different from now. Like it's almost a whole different, like, I mean, I guess it is a whole different model of doing it. I mean, that's crazy. Like, do you remember when it like, because I'm sure you still kind of had it for a while after the web store. I'm sure it like slowly got phased out. Do you remember like about when you stopped doing the mail order thing? It all became, exclusively basically web store and all that?
It's probably in the 2003, probably 2004. It's shifted. I mean, we did get a lot of letters and mail orders in the early 2000s, but it probably shifted mostly online by 2003, 2004. But we still get like the random mail order. I mean, there's still random people that throw $10 in an envelope and say, send me this CD. And like I literally like I'm like, all right, that's cool, and just we'll put a note in it and send it back to them, like like it's like the '90s.
That is okay. So I guess I didn't think about that. I mean, I take it. I guess Bridge 9 probably does still have a PO box or something.
Yeah, yeah.
People can still send you their $10 too.
People can still send us stuff and send us mail orders, which is cool.
That is quite amazing. That is, I like talking about that stuff.
And it's funny. We kept like I kept a lot of the mail orders from back then. So like, I have bins full of letters from kids from the '90s that I've gone through over the years. Like I found mail orders from a whole ton of people that later went on to put out records on Bridge 9, which was
nice.
Yeah, which was really, really cool. Like Joe Hardcore from the This Is Hardcore Fest. I have a letter from 1997 that he sent me. I think he was 16 years old, and he even said, like, if you ever have any bands that want to come play a show in Philly, let me up. Let me know, and I'll hook you up. And it's like, and now he's obviously got this great festival and has had like this whole life of music too, which is very cool. But like I have members of like Todd Jones, who was in Carry On, like as a teenager, he mail ordered from Bridge 9. A bunch of the guys in No Warning and Mental and like all these other people like that are like big booking agents now, that like just mail ordered records back then. It was cool.
That is so cool. Have you gotten anyone to two, not even in bands, but like that, like in management or something else, who maybe was in a high school band or something like that, who had submitted to you? Have you found any people you've met, maybe not musicians anymore, but were like, yeah, my band submitted to you back in the day? Then obviously it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's not so much of that. I'm sure there's definitely demos that I was like, meh, pass. That didn't go anywhere with us, but just knowing that somebody took the time to write a letter and mail it to you, and it's pretty cool. It's special. It definitely feels it's a different experience, I think, than now. I mean, I wouldn't go back. I mean, I think now is convenient, and I mean, being able to put something online like right this moment and be able to send it to somebody tomorrow is pretty sick compared to weeks of back and forth before you can actually send them something.
Yeah, can you imagine if tomorrow we had to go back to that? Just all of that's good. Like, internet's gone. You gotta, like, if you want some Bridge 9 goods, you gotta send me $1.
Yeah,
Like,
you gotta find me in the back of the Middle East nightclub with my table of records, and buy it at a distro. Yeah.
Oh, I love a good distro to show. I enjoy a good distro. I haven't seen one of those in a little while, and I think I'm going to the wrong shows lately. I like a good distro. For I want to talk to you too about it, for being in the New England region, which I think talking to Travis from Piebald earlier this year, we talked a little bit about, like, the scene up there, like in the 90s and stuff, but I'm kind of interested, like, paint us a little bit of the picture, like the hardcore scene and stuff in Massachusetts, like mid 90s when Bridge 9 is starting. I mean, a ton of bands, a lot of venues. Like, it's from an outsider perspective, it seemed like it was a strong time for that music up in that way.
Yeah, I mean, Boston has always really had a strong scene. A big part of it, I think, is because there's so many and there's so many colleges here, and there's so many schools. So a lot of people come to Boston. So there's a lot of outside influence. People that end up growing roots here, like I did, right? Like I'm from Central Connecticut originally. Went to school in Vermont, and then when I graduated, moved to Boston because a lot of the people that I had grown up with ended up there. Because when you grow up in Central Connecticut, you either move north to Boston or south to New York City. And a lot of the kids I knew, especially people that were into like the hardcore punk scene, all ended up in Boston. So like when I moved to the Mission Hill neighborhood in '98, I mean, there was a dozen people from my high school that were all into hardcore and punk that all ended up in the same neighborhood.
Wow.
So yeah, it was like that was part of the reason why I moved there, is because like I knew people there.
Was there, and I mean, it sounds like you've moved around the New England region a little bit. Like, I mean, I'm always interested in that. Like, is there, Massachusetts is one, including Boston. Like, I feel like people know there's definitely a scene there in music and stuff. Are there any other pockets, like, within New England, and maybe even ones no one would think of, where it's like, yeah, that one, that town in New Hampshire, or that has a really strong music scene? I mean, are there any pockets up that way? And I mean, I'm talking, I guess, too, back in the 90s, but you can talk now,
Yeah.
where there are just real strong scenes in these little pockets of New England.
Yeah, I mean, like in the '90s, Portland, Maine had a great scene. They had a great venue, and have had a great venue. Like Manchester, New Hampshire. I mean, I remember Portsmouth had a venue for a long time. So you get these scenes that would kind of exist around cool record stores or cool venues. I was living in Vermont for 4 years, and I was about an hour south of Burlington, but Burlington had a great scene and a really long time venue that had been there. It took me a little while to get to know people there and to kind of grow from outside of like my little whatever college campus kind of bubble that I was in. But we go to Albany, which was about an hour away as well, and there was tons of great shows in Albany too.
I always wonder that up there, because too, that's the other thing, is it seems like you can jump around. You're one of those areas where you can kind of get to the other state fairly easy or fairly fast. So you kind of end up in, I feel like scenes maybe kind of mingle a bit. I don't know if that's true, but it seems like the proximity would make it where those Vermont bands probably come down to Massachusetts, bands go up to Vermont, that kind of deal.
Well, the great thing was back then, if when I was in high school, if I wanted to see a band, I could see them 3 times, because I'd go see them in Rhode Island, I'd see them in Central Connecticut, and then I'd go see them in Boston, or I'd see them in Western Mass. I was being in Connecticut. I was 2 hours from Boston, but I was like 45 minutes from Western Mass. So, bands would hit one of those probably 4 places, if not 2 or 3 times.
You and I are kind of the same boat in that, where I'm at Jamestown here in Western New York. Like, I'm 90 minutes from Buffalo, 2.5 from Cleveland, like 2.5 from Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
3 from Rochester. So like you're saying, if I really like a band, there's definitely been times where I do my own little weekend run. You
Yep.
can go see the band 2 or 3 times if you want to make that drive.
Yep.
You can do it in those regions. It's kind of the nice perk of that. But kind of again, kind of jumping back to like early on in Bridge 9, what were like some of the challenges early on? What would you say were some of the biggest hurdles, or even just straight up pain in the asses of getting Bridge 9 going in the beginning? What were some of your early challenges?
The hardest part, so when you're the label, you're basically like, you have to come up with, and a lot of the times the label has to come up with the money to help get the band in the studio. I mean, sometimes bands do their own thing with recordings, and then the label helps afterwards. Early on, I would try and help the band get into the studio, pay for the recording, that they had, and you have to figure out how to come up with that money. And I mean, back then, I just had a part-time job. Like, I was barely covering my own bills, much less helping launch a band. So like, trying to always get creative and come up with ways, whatever side hustles you could do to come up with whatever means you needed to push a project along, was a really big part of it.
That would make sense. And as you're saying that, I feel like the earlier on, probably the less money the bands you were working with had. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like as you're getting notoriety and stuff, and maybe you do start having a little money, the labels and choices of the bands. I'm sure early on, yeah, you're not working with bands who have any budget themselves.
Yeah.
Probably not really, or even maybe know how to do some of that stuff. I'm sure a lot of those bands too, probably the first time they're going in a studio, or it's the first time they're really, recording or doing anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really grassroots, and it still is in a lot of ways. Like, it's not something, that like I talk about gold records. There's no gold records here. So
how about like your day to day? I'm sure is like changed over the years. I mean, is it totally different running Bridge 9 in 2022 than it was in, say, like 95, 96? Is it totally different monster?
yeah, well, it's just changed in a lot of different ways, right? So like back then, there, even though it seemed like a ton of responsibilities, it was pretty minor. Um, as you go from putting out one record a year, or two, or three, to 5 to 10 to 20 records a year, the pace picks up, the responsibilities grow. You hire additional people. Like, you have like the whole infrastructure of everything that you're doing expands and grows, and it can contract. Like, things are, like with a band, you go through waves of popularity, or you go through waves of opportunity. And then sometimes things are awesome. Sometimes things are slower. You just have to kind of be able to come up with the flexibility to grow and shrink with it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, we, as a label, like, my responsibilities have changed considerably over the years. There was a period of time where we had like 6 employees, and we were putting out like 20 records a year. Right now, on the heels of COVID and our move, we're actually at a smaller like number of people here than we've been in a long time. In a lot of ways, we're like rebuilding and just regrowing, kind of in a new way. Yeah,
That's great.
During COVID, I mean, we got down to a skeleton staff, and we got to the point where we were as small as we had been in 20 years, and we weren't putting out new records, right? Most people weren't touring, we're not really doing anything, so we were kind of focused on just, in a lot of ways, just getting through it, but then also transitioning from our old warehouse, where we've been for many years, to the new space that we're in now. And if you ask like my daughter, what I did today, or what I've been doing for months, she would like, Dad, so like, what did you scrape today? Or what did you sand? Or what did you paint? Because I was wearing a contractor hat like half the day, every day, trying to get this new space ready. So, and she would just make fun of me for it.
You're staying quite busy, which I mean also goes into, which I was going to talk about. I mean, if people are watching this on YouTube, and you can see the gorgeous record store behind you, but like I mentioned earlier too, the Bridge 9 record store that just opened. I mean, was that a product of during the pandemic, like figuring out what you were doing next? Is that where the idea for the record store came up, or was that an idea long before the pandemic happened?
So having a record store component to being a label is, I think, a dream of a lot of people when you're involved in music. But it was just something that I never put the energy into really thinking about. But during the pandemic, and being in a position where everything was so kind of hidden away, and you're separated from people for so long, right? I mean, there was a period of time where it was just me and my partner. Just working by ourselves, and packing all the mail orders just like I had many years before. And with the move into having a record store, you get to the point where you want something that is based in reality, right? In community. You want something where, people can come in. I mean, we, for 14 years, were in like an industrial complex that didn't have a sign. Nobody even knew we were there, which was probably cool and it helped keep things low profile for certain years, but you get to the point where you just feel detached. And I think I just got to the point in my life where I was like, I want to be the person that has a space where people can come to it and build that community.
Do you think it would have, which I don't know, maybe eventually would have, but was the pandemic kind of the push to do that? Like, do you think you would have gotten to that had that not happened? Or do you think you would have kind of kept putting it off? Like, it's a dream and it's a thought, but when am I going to get to it?
I think I would have gotten to it, but it would have taken a lot longer. And I mean, our hand was kind of forced because the building that we were in for many years was sold out from under us. So, yeah, I mean, we originally signed a 3-year lease because I liked the space, but I wasn't 100%, but I needed a spot because I had to move out of the old place. And so I landed at this building, that we ended up, signing a lease for 3 years, and we're, there for 11 additional years, kind of month to month. So by the time the landlord, he was an older gentleman during COVID, was like, all right, I'm cashing out. I'm, retiring basically. We were just kind of faced with the fact that we had to do something, and I was ready to do it. But, and I don't think I could have done it any other time, because the whole moving into out of your space and breaking down 14 years of stuff it's so all encompassing that I wouldn't have been able to wrap my head around it if it was like a regular year. So
it's a lot to unpack. It seems like that's a long time to be in a spot.
Yeah, and I keep everything, right? Like I've always had a pretty big warehouse. So like I said, I kept all my mail orders from the 90s. So, I'm part archivist, part, I don't know, just don't throw things out. And so like that translates to lots and lots of stuff. And you kind of have to, I don't know, it makes moving difficult.
How long? I mean, I think it's only been like a couple months. How long has the record store actually been open for now?
So it's been open for just over 3 months. We opened in September, and it's been great. It's been cool. It's we're still trying to get our rhythm and trying to build up our inventory and kind of wrap our heads around now being like this kind of public facing retail space. But it's been cool, and that was great because it took us 18 months just to get to that point. So we got the keys in early March last year. And it took us 1.5 years to renovate the space to finally be able to open. So by the time we could open, I was just like, fuck it. Like I don't care. I just want to get open.
You just want that. Yeah. By that point, you just want that thing out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're selling Bridge 9 albums, and also by the looks of it, a couple up there look non-Bridge 9. So you're selling other things, right? I assume you didn't release Ramon. Do I see Ramon's Road to Ruin back there?
Yeah.
I don't remember Bridge 9 releasing that one.
I mean, we're on. It's kind of wild to think about it. We're on a main street in this kind of nice New England town in Beverly, Massachusetts, and it's wild to think that we're opening a punk rock record store, in like such a high profile spot, especially in 2022. But I mean, the reality is, look, I love Bridge 9. Bridge 9's cool. We've been able to work with a lot of bands. But the reality is the average person coming off the street here has no idea who American Nightmare is, has no idea who Terror is. So, and this store isn't just a record store. So we have one half of it is punk rock records, and all things that are within a degree of separation. And the other side is kind of sports clothing.
Nice.
I'm a brand. So I have a brand called Sully's that does like kind of Boston centric sports apparel. And the average, so the person coming in that might be a Bruins fan and sees something that they want to buy, there's no context, right? So, like, we want to at least have stuff that resonates with people that might be not, as well versed in everything we do. So that's why we have, we got the Ramones records and MC5 and Bad Brains records on the wall. So there's something that is a kind of a point of context for someone.
I mean, yeah, you have a great selection. I mean, on top of all the Bridge 9, I mean, there's some absolute classics on the wall up there. So there's a nice amount of everything. I want to, I kind of want to ask this too, as someone who just opened a record store and runs a record label. But I mean, this is something that's always like, I myself am a vinyl collector, and I feel like in punk and hardcore, I feel like it kept for like vinyl. Now, obviously, there's been a vinyl boom, and I feel like it was kind of happening in punk and hardcore and stuff longer before that. But I mean, does it ever blow your mind to see where vinyls went? Because we went from an era where like when you go back to like the early 2000s or mid 2000s and piracy and stuff, I mean, you could hardly get someone to go buy just a CD per se. But now like vinyl is like way more inconvenient, more expensive. Like, I mean, there's a collector's side and everything, but like, does it ever blow your mind, or did you ever see vinyl coming back the way it did? Because again, I'm saying this as someone who collects vinyl. I mean, if you look at where music was 15 years ago, to imagine to buy a physical record, I feel like that was almost insane. Like, I mean, I would love your thoughts on that as a record label owner and all that.
Yeah, well, it is wild because in the 90s, I mean, the pressing plant that I used back then had like 15 employees, and they were mostly pressing country records, punk records, and because they were in Nashville, so like some country records, punk records, and hip hop records. And like that was probably it. Now they've got hundreds of employees and have like a whole, I mean, it's crazy. So vinyl has obviously grown quite a bit. I think that, it's the tangible aspect of it. It's something that you can hold. It's something that you can, it is a product and it's collectible, but it's something that you can connect with more than just flipping through things on Spotify. So I think vinyl was popular for decades before it went away, and it went away for convenience issues or whatever, quality, sound quality. And I think people realized that wasn't all that had been sold to them as like, CDs and digital. So while like digital music and streaming music is very convenient and it's a great way for people to listen to stuff and to find out about new bands, I think vinyl's not going anywhere now. I think it's not a fad. It was clearly cool for decades before, and I think it's going to stay that way. But it is wild to see it, and it's cool because you're right. I mean, when Bridge 9 really got our feet underneath us is when the floor dropped out with respect to the music industry, because the label might have started in '95, but our first nationally touring bands didn't start until 2000, and then into
you're right in that.
Yeah, prior to that, it was putting out records with friends that were just going a state or two away and playing random shows in halls and basements and stuff. After that, like 2000, 2001, in those early 2000s, that's when we started getting bands that were really willing to tour, both in the US and internationally. And that was like when music basically just people were curating their record collection or their music collections with like, stolen digital downloads or whatever, right? Like like LimeWire and like these different programs to just like not pay for music. And I think culturally it's come back where, now there's conveniences and now there's like music, like with Spotify and there's conveniences in these programs where people can, it's just culturally, it's just come back to being something that's accepted and cool or whatever, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but basically I think we're now in a position where music is something that people, support in a way that they didn't maybe when Bridge 9 was really getting started.
which is nice to see. Cause I don't know. I mean, again, like if you went back to those days, I'm sure most people, if you told them, no, give it time, like people will buy album and not CDs per se. I mean, but even CDs seem like they've had a little more of a, like, I don't want to say boom, but they sell a little better than they were for a while. But like to, yeah, ever think that vinyl was the thing that was like going to blow up again. I love to see it. I think it's great. Like I love you can open a record store. Like I think it's awesome. But yeah, it's so interesting, including from a person on the label side, you know, the one putting them out. It's like, yeah, I don't know that I ever saw vinyl becoming the thing that it has, or even branching out. Because punk and hardcore, I mean, there were still, I feel like there's always people collecting stuff. You still have that, like those subgenres. There'd still be people kind of interested in vinyl, but like you can go buy vinyl at like Barnes and Noble or Guitar Center or something like that now. Like it's mainstream.
Yeah, I mean it's everywhere, and there's actually 5 record stores within 2 towns. So like, right, I live and work in Beverly. I'm 1 town over from Salem here in Massachusetts, and between Salem and Beverly, there's 5 record stores. And in the same way, Bridge 9's record store is rooted in hardcore and punk. 1 street over, there's a hip hop based record store. It's so
nice.
So like, and there's a pretty good overlap between people that come to my store and people that go to their store. So we're able to kind of refer people back and forth. And, now we're getting to the point where, and even in Salem, there's like a really cool kind of more metal and kind of stoner rock based record store. And there's another one that's like more of like a digger, kind of like, like old kind of like looking through old, used
records. The crates, finding, the gems in there.
So there's a little something for everybody, and now you can come to the Beverly Salem area and hit a whole bunch of stores. And it's like hopefully it's something that'll attract people from a lot further than just our local town, right? Like, so if you live south of Boston, you're an hour away, or if you're up in New Hampshire, you can come down to this area, get lunch, and like hit a bunch of stores.
Yeah, it makes it worth it. It's not like I got to be over there. It's like, no, you can make a day of it. Go do a little record store run. You can hit it all. That's pretty cool. As we as we close up here, just a few more for you. I mean, we're kind of talking about a little, like in the beginning for you, kind of like figuring out how you run a record label and all that stuff. Are there any pointers you would give somebody trying to start a record label? I mean, I know I'm sure you can't give them the step by step, but anything you tell someone who is like, hey, I want to try to run a label.
Yeah, I mean, the first step is just start, right? Like just take whatever resources you have and do something with it, because a lot of people talk about, oh, it'd be really cool if I could just, if I could do this, and maybe I'll start when I get this, or like whenever you perceive to have whatever it is you need to do it properly. The reality is just start with whatever bare minimum you have and get it like moving, because at that point you're going to open yourself up to a whole bunch of other people that might be willing to help you, or like other attention and momentum that you can build just because you've put your first foot forward. So when people ask me about it, like that's the first thing I say is don't wait until you think you can have every bell and whistle that you think you like need. Like with Bridge 9's first couple of records, it was just real stock. I mean, we do like black vinyl, like the first record was like 900 black records, 100 on green. That was it. And it was like the covers were just black and white, real simple, folded in half. We would just like fold them by hand, stuff them in a bag. But there was also at the time back then labels that were coming out with like these full color records and, like big promotional posters and ads in magazines. And I couldn't afford any of that. And if I had been like, oh, I'll wait until I can afford posters to help promote the band, or I'll wait until I can afford like to do whatever, bell or whistle that I thought it needed, I might not have ever gotten started.
I bet a lot of labels like you're saying that, and that does seem like a really good point you're saying, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who have that idea. I want to do the label, but you keep waiting for that, like, I just got to do this now. I just got to do this. And that keeps building. And then eventually it's 5 years later and, that label's still a dream.
I mean, the reality is most people talk about what they want to do and they don't actually do it. So like, it's just, but you have to boil it down to an attainable thing. So don't blow it up into something much bigger. Just start with something bite-sized and go from there. And it doesn't have to be a label. It could be, making t-shirts, starting your own clothing brand, starting, some sort of small business. Just do it as grassroots as you can, and then build from there. I've always thought that's more interesting. When you look at a brand, or you look at like a label that starts at a really grassroots level and then just grows and then reinvests in itself. I think that's a lot more interesting than someone who like comes out with shiny, full color everything.
Oh no, absolutely. It has a better backstory and everything too. And it's kind of nice. It's like we were talking about with like the obtainability. Like Bridge Nine's quite an iconic label, including in the genre. I mean, you put out a lot of classics, but you don't start out that you don't. Bridge Nine doesn't start that way. You got to get to the point where you can have that record store and run the label for all these years and like become notable in the scene. Like you didn't just wake up in Bridge Nine. That happened.
No, I mean, and like you start out and nobody gives a shit, and like you only know your friends, and nobody cares about you, right? Like you and your friends hang out, and you try and do something for your friends. But when I put out my first record, there really was, I mean, a dozen people that I knew in like the Connecticut scene back then, and like kind of Western Massachusetts, that were doing exactly what I was doing. They were just putting out, a record with people they knew. And just trying to, and I would trade records with those people, right? Like, back then distribution involved trading a dozen records with somebody doing the exact same thing that you were, but they were just like, I was in Central Connecticut, they were in Western Mass. So like, all right, cool. I'll take 12 copies of your record, you take 12 of mine, we're even. And then I'll sell your copy of your record next to mine. So instead of me just selling, the one record I put out, maybe I have 5 records now because I did that with 4 other people. And then, it helps kind of expand their reach and expand yours as well. So
that's so cool. I mean, I enjoy, I really enjoyed talking to you. I mean, we talk to a lot of musicians on here, but I like talking on the record label side. I think that behind the scenes stuff is so interesting, and also kind of getting the history of it. Cause again, I've been doing Bridge Nine a while. So there's like these eras, and the way you started doing things, as we've talked about quite a bit with the mail order, vinyl resurgence, all these things, music industry changes quite a bit. So nice to hear about it all from someone who's been there for all of this.
Thank you. Yeah, it changes a lot, and to be able to still kind of be riding that wave and be relevant and doing stuff I feel very humbled and appreciative.
Well, Chris, I mean, now we're closing this out. I mean, where do people find you online? Where can they stay connected with the label? Again, you got the new record store. Like anything else? Like, let us know what's going on with Bridge Nine. Give us all that good stuff.
So I mean, the new store is about 35 minutes north of Boston, so it's convenient if you're going to be in the Boston area. We're also one town over from Salem, and that gets a lot of tourism. People love to go to which city. So like, if you're there, we're 5 minutes down the road. There are a bunch of other record stores in the area, so it's kind of something you can definitely make the day of. And we're also trying to do more stuff. I mean, we're building up the inventory for the label, but like yesterday we had one of our artists, this band War Women, do an acoustic performance here. Just kind of a spontaneous thing, just bring in some people and hang out and have kind of this community building kind of intimate experience. So we want to do more stuff like that too.
That's cool. Well, I mean, awesome. We really good talking to you, Chris. And if you're listening to the radio show, we'll probably play you some we'll play some stuff from Bridge Nine, past and present, here in a second. But either way, I'm Anthony Merchant. Been talking to Chris Wrenn of Bridge Nine Records right here on the Power Chord Hour.